Number 1. The Shadow Man. When I was 15, and my best friend at the time, Mark, was also 15, we sort of had complementary problems. My dad was a neglectful and abusive piece of crap. His mom was a neglectful and abusive piece of crap. Both our parents had gotten divorces when we were 10 years old, and it took 5 years for both of us to finally get tired of it. We stole some money from both of our parents and we left. We headed to the city, thinking we would be able to stay in shelters for a while, and eventually get places of our own. You really never know how difficult something can be, however, before you are actually involved in it. Turns out that although there were homeless shelters in the city, they weren't always the easiest to get into. The city had such a high population of homeless that they first required you to be there by a certain time, but they often closed their doors long before that time because they would quickly get filled up with people. Way too often, Mark and I got left out on the streets. I actually think we ended up sleeping in an alley more often than an actual shelter. After a while, about a month, the situation was getting very frustrating. However, our living situation back at home was still much worse. We agreed that we could sleep on the road forever rather than go back to that crap. Well, I will never forget what happened about 2 months into our little adventure. We were sleeping behind a dumpster. We had come across someone in the alley who found out we had some food and a little bit of money. He invited us to come to an abandoned house that a lot of people squatted in. We readily took him up on the offer. Hell, even sleeping on the floor of a building would always be better than sleeping out on the street. The house was a 3-story boarded up building, and there were lots of people in the house. There was not much furniture other than soiled mattresses and things of that nature, but there was a lot of drugs. Doug, the homeless guy that brought us to the house, had a nook to himself up in the attic of the house. He took us up there, and we gave him some food. We ate together and talked a bit. We had bought a bottle of vodka, and the 3 of us shared that, and we talked for a while. I don't remember falling asleep, just passed out eventually. Oh, and Doug had a ferret, and we fed it a little food. I loved those little things, but it did give Mark a little nip on the hand. Things began to get better for a little while. Doug and I got along, and he and Mark got along too. For about a month, we were having a really decent and easier time. Mark and I avoided doing any drugs, but we lifted a lot of vodka from the store, and we drank quite a bit. After we had been there for about a month, I woke up in the middle of the night. Mark had been sleeping beside me, and he jostled me awake while sitting up. He had his arms wrapped around his body and was rocking back and forth. He looked really anxiety-ridden, and when I asked him what was wrong, he just told me he had trouble going to sleep, and when he did, he just had nightmares. I asked him if I could help him, but he just took a couple shots of vodka and laid back down. Mark slowly began to lose his grip on reality after that. The following day, his eyes were strained completely red. He was paranoid, and he didn't want to leave the house. He wanted to sleep, but he was having a problem sleeping. I wanted to take him to the hospital, but he refused. He was scared that if we did go, that they would send us back to our homes. And that night, Mark woke me up again. He was staring at a dark corner in the room. He kept rocking himself back and forth, like the night before. At first, I didn't let him know I was awake. I noticed he was talking, and I'll never forget those words. Why? Why won't you go away? Stop hiding in the corner. I can see you. Stop staring at me. Why do you keep staring at me, you asshole? I can't go to sleep until you leave." I got up and tried to see how he was doing. He jumped out of his skin when I touched him, but then he was frantic. "Don't make any sudden moves, or he might come at you," he warned me. When I asked him who he was talking about, Mark responded, "The shadow man in the corner. He keeps crunching on raw rice and staring at me." There was no one in the corner. It was just a really dark part of the room. I tried to let him know, but he insisted that a shadow in the corner of the room was eating raw rice. Well, as if that wasn't bad enough, the following day he was much worse. He had not slept at all. He was jittery, his eyes completely red, and he was nervous. He wouldn't eat either, and whenever I suggested that he should try to rest, he got really scared. He insisted on keeping awake. If he went to bed, the shadow man was going to get him. And the following night was more of that, only Mark was even more distressed than before. He cried a lot, and he was convinced if he didn't keep his eyes open, the shadow man eating the raw rice was gonna get him. I tried to get him to eat. I tried to get him to agree to come to a doctor or get some rest. He would do none of it. I brought him a bottle of water and tried to give it to him, but he just freaked out. He insisted the shadow man had told him not to drink any water, and if he did, it would kill him. Well, finally, when he wouldn't sleep again, he woke me up crying. He was clutching his arm and was begging the shadow man to give him his arm back. Apparently, the shadow man had paralyzed his arm in his mind. I had to get him out of the house and to a doctor. He was losing his mind completely. When I first tried to get Mark to leave with me, he began freaking out. He was positive if he left, the shadow man would get him. He struggled, but I was eventually able to force him to get up. And even though he kept screaming at me, I eventually got him out of the squatting house and over to a phone booth. I called an ambulance, and although he fought tooth and nail that he had to get back and watch the shadow man, they were able to get him to the hospital. I found out very quickly that it was too late for Mark. He had rabies. Apparently the ferret that bit him had died of it a few weeks before, but he didn't get treated before it was too late. We couldn't comfort him when he passed away. He was paranoid still and scared that the shadow man was gonna kill him. Don't run away from home. If I hadn't, my buddy might still be alive. Number 2. Chainsaw. I was the teenage runaway. Hell, even thinking about it now, I can't really understand why I felt like I had to run away. I sort of felt like life was way too hard at home. My parents pretty much ignored me and lavished attention on my siblings, and you can only feel sorry for yourself so long before you go out and do something about it. But why I ever thought that living on the streets would be better than having my own bedroom, board, and possessions was beyond me. But hey, it was how I felt. I saved up some money, and I decided I was going to move to California. I was going to go out and be an actor. I figured once I got to Hollywood, everything would be set. So I packed up a carry-on bag, and I bought a Greyhound ticket to Hollywood. I had never been on a cross-country bus before. I really didn't care for it. I had a really hard time sleeping on the bus. After a day or two, I was so tired, and it seemed like this was going to go on forever. And worst of all, I had a bit of a layover in a small country stop in Missouri. I was supposed to change buses, but I also had to wait nearly 12 hours for my connecting bus. The station I was at was in the middle of nowhere, and it was built into a room of an abandoned gas station, and that was it. It was right off of the exit from the highway, and other than that, there was just road, woods, and fields as far as you could see. There was no one at the station, but there was a bench inside the room, and I was able to lay myself out on it. It was much easier to fall asleep there than it was on the bus, since it wasn't moving. Plus, it was very, very quiet. Hell, I passed out so quickly that I don't even remember falling asleep. When I woke up, I was at first very confused. It took me a few moments to get my bearings, and even then to know what time it was. It was dark. It was quiet. But the worst part was that my bag was gone. I got up frantic looking for it. There was nothing but 2 benches and a trash can in the place, and my bag was nowhere to be seen. That meant the few possessions I had, my wallet and thus my money, it was all gone. I panicked as I began pacing around the room, and the panic did nothing good for me either. My anxiety kept rising, my nerves were frazzled, and I then realized that someone had to have come into the building while I was sleeping, walk up to the bench, and take that bag right off the bench. And that in itself was terrifying. I tried to think as to what to do. There wasn't a payphone in the bus stop. I wondered if there might be one in the abandoned gas station, and thought perhaps I should check it out. And it was unlikely, but I felt like it was worth checking out. I was nervous when I went outside. It was dark. Coming from a city life, it was darker than I had ever seen it before. I took a quick look up at the sky and saw the Milky Way for the first time. Beyond that, it was quiet. I mean, there were a lot of crickets and plenty of frogs, but other than that, quiet. I walked around the building and came to the front door of the building. It was just a regular wooden door, which was odd to me, being that it was a gas station, but the latch on the door was broken, so I was able to get into it. The whole place was very run down. It must have been closed for a very long time. There were rotten shelves and walls and trash all over the place, and I discovered pretty quickly that there was not going to be a payphone there. It was then when I heard it, a weird, motory, buzzing noise, and it took me just a moment to realize it was a chainsaw. I'd never used one before, but I'd seen enough movies with them in it, and it wasn't particularly loud at first, so I assumed it was probably getting far away. But as I listened, it got closer, and I could tell it was getting even closer. I wondered what the best thing to do was, and I thought hiding was a bad idea. The stop was right at the bottom of an exit off the highway, so I thought I needed to get myself back to the highway. Maybe from that point I could hitchhike. So I went out of the store and back out into the darkness. There wasn't a bright moon out that night, and I was sure that I would stumble a few times, but everything put together was just way too scary. The missing bag, the chainsaw noise, and just everything. I first was just walking quickly, but the chainsaw noise was getting closer. I decided I had to hustle my way and get back to the highway quickly. It was scary and difficult, and I never stopped hearing the buzzing of that chainsaw until I was very far away. Number 3. Magic. This story didn't happen to me. It was a story that my grandpa told me over and over again about a time he ran away from home. It was during the Great Depression, so I guess I always felt drawn to the story, wondering what life was like back then, but knowing I wouldn't actually want to live then. My grandpa did not finish elementary school, and when he was 10, his father forced him to quit going to class and stay home and work on the farm. My grandpa hated the farm, though. He thought it was dull and routine, and that he was missing out on excitement in life. It was when one of his aunts read him a story about a boy who ran away and joined the circus and experienced a new life. That was when he started dreaming big and deciding that one day he would do that too. His family attended the county fair every year. They entered several contests, and the family was generally reliant on the money the fair brought in. But, like working on the farm, he didn't really like the fair either. It was, however, at the fair, when he was 14, that he watched a magic show and was immediately spellbound by the magician, seeing the magic show again and again for a couple days, and the magician noticing him. When my grandpa was managing the pie booth, the magician came and talked to him. They immediately struck up a rapport, and when the magician found out that my grandpa wanted adventure in life, he invited him to run off with him. My grandpa decided to do this. He left with the man and began teaching him how to help out in his magic act. After a stop in another town, he invited my grandpa back to his place, where they could continue to work on their magic act. The guy apparently had a really big house. It was way too big for someone who worked at a fair, but my grandpa found out that he wanted to start learning how to do the saw a woman in half trick. The trick was relatively new at the time. He was building his own prop to do the trick, and of course he showed my grandpa the prop. He also then showed him how it worked, and my grandpa was fascinated. Although a female assistant would help him on stage, having my grandpa there gave him more practice. He had previously had an assistant, but she had left him earlier in the summer. He was currently looking for a new one, and wasn't having the best of luck. The magician introduced my grandpa to moonshine. They would often get very drunk together and tell stories. The magician, he had been all around the country, performing tricks for fairs and circuses, and he had many great stories. It was one night, after my grandpa had been with him for about a month. They had been drinking really heavily and listening to the radio. A bifurcated woman's body had been found in a field the day before. Police were encouraging people to come to the police station if they had any information. The very inebriated magician laughed a little. When my grandpa asked him why, he admitted to him that the woman they found was his assistant. He had screwed up the sawing a woman in half trick and accidentally, according to him, killed the woman. Not knowing what to do, he hid the body. My grandpa wanted to believe him, but he didn't. The problem was that the magician kept smiling when he told my grandpa the story, and he couldn't imagine anyone who had accidentally killed someone smiling while telling the story to somebody else. The two continued drinking. They kept talking, and right before the magician passed out, he admitted it. He admitted he killed the woman on purpose. He had met her at a fair and wanted her to work with him and be with him. However, it didn't take long for her to lose interest and decide to leave back for home. So he got her very, very drunk and killed her. And he told my grandpa, the best time to kill someone is after you get them very, very drunk. My grandpa was drunk but scared. He knew he had to leave immediately. However, he blacked out after that. When my grandpa came around, he was surprised he was not in the house. He was in a forest feeling awful. Then it slowly came back to him that he had left the house in fear for his life. If the magician could have killed a woman during the trick after getting her drunk, there was nothing stopping him from killing my grandpa. I don't really know what happened after that. I know my grandpa spent a few years traveling and doing odd jobs on farms, but he always told me the story of how he met a murderer and may have gotten murdered himself if he didn't leave. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button below and the bell, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the Cat that will appear at the end of this closing. And leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and please share it with someone you think might enjoy it, If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most important, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.